Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. Our book today is Cyber War: How Russian Hackers and Trolls Helped Elect a President by Kathleen Hall Jamieson. This is from the introduction. Imagine a strategy memo forecasting cyber attacks by Russian hackers, trolls, and bots designed to roil social discontent and damage the electoral process of a major party U.S. presidential nominee. Or, if she winds up winning, sabotage her ability to govern. Guaranteed payoff, no fingerprints, no keystroke record, no contrails in the cloud. To ensure that Americans would believe that disparaging messages about her were made in the U.S., use Bitcoin to buy space and set up virtual private networks on American servers. Distribute hacked content stolen from the accounts of her staff and associates through an intermediary, WikiLeaks. Use identity theft, stolen social security numbers, and appropriated IDs to circumvent Facebook and PayPal's demand for actual names, birth dates, and addresses. On platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, register under assumed names. Diffuse and amplify your attack and advocacy through posts on Facebook, tweets and retweets on Twitter, videos on YouTube, reporting and commentary on RT, blogging on Tumblr, news sharing on Reddit, and viral memes and jokes on 9gag. Add to the mix a video game called Hilltendo, in which a missile-trading Clinton figure vaporizes classified emails sought by the FBI. Employ online agitators and bots to upvote posts from imposter websites such as blackmattersus.com to the top of such subreddits as r/thedonald and r/Hillary for prison. Drive content to trend. To maximize the impact of your handiwork, use data analytics and search engine maximization tools built into social media platforms. To test and fuel doubts about the security of U.S. voter information, hack the electoral systems of the states. And throughout the primary and general election season, seed the notion that if Hillary Clinton were to win, she would have done so by rigging the election, an outcome that would repay her assaults on the legitimacy of their leader's presidency with doubts about her own. Were she instead to lose, she would no longer be a thistle in the toned torso of the hackers and trolls' boss's likely boss. Every result but one produces a desirable outcome for the Kremlin. Outcome 1, Clinton is off the international stage. Outcome 2, she wins but can't govern effectively. Outcome 3, the former Secretary of State is elected and the country simply moves on, but the sabotage nonetheless has magnified cultural tensions and functions as a pilot from which to birth later success, perhaps when she runs for a second term. The only eventuality that damages the Russian cyber soldiers and their commander-in-chief is the fourth, in which, in real time, the cyber attackers are unmasked by a vigilant intelligence community, condemned by those in both major political parties and around the world, characterized by the media as spies and saboteurs. The Russian message is blocked or labeled as Russian propaganda, and when included in media accounts, the stolen content is relentlessly tied to its Russian origins and sources. None of that, however, happened. Instead, to the surprise of the Russian masterminds, as well as both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, he won the Electoral College, and with it a 4-year claim on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although countrywide she bested him by almost 2.9 million votes, he unexpectedly captured an Electoral College majority by running the table. By the end of the evening of November 8th, Florida, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were in his column. The ways in which Russian hacking and social media messaging altered the content of the electoral dialogue and thus contributed to Donald Trump's victory are the subjects of this book. To begin my exploration, this overview chapter will highlight key findings of the U.S. intelligence community, preview my focus on the hackers and trolls and the synergy between them, justify casting the Russian machinations as acts of cyber war, outline ways in which susceptibilities in our system of government and media structures magnified their effect, and note 5 presuppositions that will shape my analysis of the Russian trolls' work, and one that will guide my study of the effects of the hackers. Forming the backdrop for my inquiry are 3 reports on the Russian intervention in the 2016 presidential election. The October 7, 2016 statement jointly issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Election Security. The January 2017 conclusion of the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, and the February 2018 Robert Mueller indictment of 13 of the Russians allegedly behind the social media intrusions. On a day that will live in campaign lore, as much for what didn't happen as what did, more on that in a moment, the first of the 3 revealed the following. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of email from U.S. persons and institutions, including the U.S. political organizations. The recent disclosures of alleged hacked emails on sites like DCLeaks.com and WikiLeaks and by the Guccifer 2.0 online persona are consistent with the methods and motives of Russian-directed efforts. These thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Such activity is not new to Moscow. The Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia, for example, to affect public opinion there. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. That's from the report. The next report put a name to one of those senior-most officials and specified an intended beneficiary, Donald Trump. Cyber War is the book.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, Elizabeth Warren has announced she's running for president, or at least she's exploring running for president, which, functionally is the same thing as saying, yes, I'm running for president. MSNBC this morning, I wasn't channel surfing, and we just had it on MSNBC while we were getting up and getting dressed. And their way of covering it was showing a clip of Elizabeth Warren getting beer out of the refrigerator and speculating about whether she's enough of a Joe Sixpack. Isn't that brilliant? Of course, it being one of the cable TV networks, we can't talk about issues. So we got to talk about whether she drinks beer. Michael Steele on MSNBC pointed out that, she has already been proven on a national stage. She has taken national hits and has bounced back. So, my question to you is, do you think that Elizabeth Warren has what it takes to become president of the United States? I'm very excited personally by her announcement. I have long been a huge Elizabeth Warren fan. Her candidacy, probably more than anybody else's, has a chance. Well, not just a chance. I think it's a certainty that Bernie's going to run too. So she and Bernie are going to be slugging it out for the left end of the spectrum. In the middle, among kind of the more corporate Democrats, you'll have Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Beto O'Rourke. We'll see who else. Joe Biden. Although I think you could almost put Joe Biden in more of the conservative category of Democrats. But it's an interesting one. This is the really the first time since 1976 when Jimmy Carter ran for president. This is the first time since 1976, and arguably in a big way the first time since 1968 that 64, that America, when LBJ was running for president after Kennedy was killed. This is the first time that Americans have had an opportunity to actually vote for a real progressive for president. Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, good guys, they did a lot of good things, but they were very much middle-of-the-road Democrats. and just kind of fine with corporate America basically running things and everything else. And Elizabeth Warren is a genuine progressive. I've got some clips here of her opening announcement. And this is she released a 4-minute video, and Nate has chopped it into 3 little pieces here to share with you. This first one, 39-second clip, this is kind of at the beginning of it, where she lays out the foundation for her run.
If you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to be able to take care of yourself and the people you love. That's a fundamental promise of America. A promise that should be true for everyone. Growing up in Oklahoma, that promise came through for me and my family. After my older brothers joined the military and I was still just a kid, my daddy had a heart attack and couldn't work. My mom found a minimum wage job at Sears, and that job saved our house and our family. My daddy ended up as a janitor, but he raised a daughter who got to be a public school teacher, a law professor, and a senator. We got a real opportunity to build something.
So number one, yeah, she's like America, basically, or at least many Americans. In other words, came out of a blue-collar working-class background. The prosperity of the 1950s, 60s, 70s allowed for her to get a decent education, a decent job, end up a professor at wherever she was a professor, and on it goes like that. Then she gets into where we're at right now, the American nightmare, essentially, and America's middle class under attack. This is from the kind of the middle part of her opening, her 4-minute video declaring the possibility of her candidacy.
America's middle class is under attack. Billionaires and big corporations decided they wanted more of the pie, and they enlisted politicians to cut them a fatter slice. They crippled unions so no one could stop them.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
Dismantled the financial rules meant to keep us safe after the Great Depression, and cut their own taxes so they paid less than their secretaries and janitors. Corruption is poisoning our democracy. Politicians look the other way while big insurance companies deny patients life-saving coverage, while big banks rip off consumers, and while big oil companies destroy this planet. Our government's supposed to work for all of us, but instead, it has become a tool for the wealthy and well-connected.
Now, that is the clip that you would think that a cable news network would want to run to say, yeah, they destroyed the unions, they went after the average working person, but no, the networks have no interest in talking about issues. I guarantee you there will be no discussion of issues as we go into this campaign, just as there was no discussion of issues in the 2018 campaign, just as there was no discussion of issues on the cable networks in the 2016 campaign, there won't be in this one. And that, I think, works to the disadvantage of genuine progressives like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Anyhow, we'll see how this shakes out. But that's the clip that should have been on every television screen in America and never will be, in all probability. Here's the end part of Elizabeth Warren's vision for the future. And again, my question to you is do you think, A, that she has a good chance, to win the Democratic nomination? And B, if she does she have a good chance to beat, I'm guessing it's going to be Mike Pence. I'm guessing that Donald Trump is going to bow out, but we'll see, Trump or Pence in 2020. And also, who do you think, if she is the nominee, she should pick as her running mate? Anyhow, here's her closing pitch. And again, this is something that the networks, I think, in my opinion, frankly, would never play. Here it is.
We can make our democracy work for all of us. We can make our economy work for all of us. We can rebuild America's middle class, but this time we gotta build it for everyone. No matter where you live in America, and no matter where your family came from in the world, you deserve a path to opportunity, because no matter what our differences, most of us want the same thing: to be able to work hard, play by the same set of rules, and take care of the people we love. That's the America I'm fighting for. And that's why today I'm launching an exploratory committee for president. But the outcome of this election will depend on you. If we organize together, if we fight together, if we persist together, we can win. We can, and we will. We can make.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was it? Okay. Meanwhile, you know, the marketplace, as it were, is just handing arguments to Elizabeth Warren. Today, the Wall Street Journal reports that more than 3 dozen drug makers raised the prices of hundreds of medications in the U.S. on Tuesday, most of them on generics. Most of the generic companies, you know, generic drugs are supposed to compete with brand name drugs because it's the same drug, only it's, you know, at a lower price. Well, the big brand name companies have been buying up all the generic companies and then jacking the prices up. So they're essentially competing with themselves. So, you know, this is the kind of stuff that Elizabeth Warren is all about. The New York Times today, Ashted, Herndon, and Alexander Burns noting, well, this was actually yesterday, day before yesterday, noting that Elizabeth Warren is heading to Iowa. This next week, she's going to be in Des Moines, Council Bluffs, Storm City, and Sioux Falls. Iowa, of course, has the first in the nation Democratic caucuses in February of next year. So we're 13 months out from the caucuses. But this is the note that they make, and I think it's a really important one. The party has no single leader, the Democratic Party, no obvious front runner. Now, I would argue that Bernie is the obvious front runner. I know that others would argue that Joe Biden is the obvious front runner. I think, you know, both of them are fairly obvious front runners, but, you know, because Bernie nearly took down Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden was vice president for 8 years and has run for president like I don't know how many times. Anyhow, they continue. There is no broadly unifying ideology, and I think that's the key to the whole thing. Is this is the moment when the Democratic Party decides whether it's a party that is progressive or whether it's just another political party in the bag, in the pockets of you know, billionaires and big corporations. And they note that the Democratic Party has no broadly unifying ideology as it moves away from a quarter century of dominance by the Clintons and Barack Obama, who, you know, essentially have become modern day royalty and very, very wealthy based on having been in the presidency and you know, all this kind of stuff. So, you know, where is this going to go? How do you think this is going to shake out? And you know, what happens next? I also want to talk about Mitt Romney and Donald Trump in just a minute. I'll give you a little rant on that when we come back, and then we'll pick up your phone calls and you know, just get into these issues. Where is the Democratic Party at right now? Which direction is the party going? Who's going to be the standard bearer for the party? And what are really the essential credentials in this you know, era of inclusion for a candidate for president?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
17 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back, John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think she'd make an excellent candidate. I think her, along with maybe Beta O'Rourke or one of the young women like Rahida Tlaib or Ocasio-Cortez, would be, you know, bring in the younger generation. I think she knows a lot about regulations, which is a good portion of what is wrong with our government and what we could do about it. And then the other person would bring in maybe the Green New Deal. You know, she really knows about corruption and I would call it now the cannibalized economy that is pushed by Wall Street, where, you know, we have gentrification in housing, we spend billions and trillions and unaccounted for by the, you know, military-industrial complex. And then we also have a lot of waste and fraud in healthcare. She would be excellent. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I'm really psyched up about that. Yes.
I'm with you, John, and the thing that's amazing is that she actually raised more money in the 2018. She and Bernie were both up for re-election. He in Vermont, her in Massachusetts as senators, and she raised more money from small donations than Bernie did. I mean, it was a smaller percentage overall of her fundraising, but it was a larger actual amount of money. She raised $10 million more than Bernie did, and unfortunately, the ability to raise money is like one of the most important criteria to being a successful candidate for president.
Right, but we have this whole new mechanism which has really democratized the process, and that is small donations and reaching out to people that way. And it's been a win for a lot of different candidates.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of idealism that's going on also, that in combination with that, and people are really energized by the whole thing. So I think she's a good candidate, but there's a lot of good candidates. But I think that we need to focus on one person. I'm all for it. I think she would work, and I would work for her like 12-hour days for at least a couple of days.
Yeah, I'm inclined to say the same, although I'm not going to endorse a candidate in the primary this time around. I did last time, but there was obvious reasons why I did that. A whole bunch of them, actually. But if Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were both on the ballot in Minnesota in the Democratic primary, do you have a sense right now, John, which one you'd be choosing? Or is there anybody else that could knock out, in your mind, these two serious, genuine, solid, unimpeachable progressives?
Well, I'm a bad person to ask with that, because I really don't have a good feel for how other people think, but I want a progressive. I think we need that kind of politics because we have existential threats to our, throughout the whole world. There's a coming together of people on the other side of globalization, like Yanis Varoufakis, I can't remember his
right.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, we really need to move.
Yeah, I agree. John, there's something funky with your phone. I can barely hear you this morning. Usually you sound just fine. But anyhow, I gotta run. John, thanks for the call. Spot on all points. We'll see where this goes. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 21 minutes and change past the hour. Elizabeth Warren running for president. Meanwhile, there's a second issue I wanted to raise with you today. We've got a bunch of news. And by the way, in the next hour, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the full hour taking your calls. And then in our third hour, our old friend Patty Lavera is going to drop by from Food and Water Watch. And we're going to be talking about GMO labeling. It's becoming a really big issue. But to Trump, this Amnesty International pointing out that yesterday morning or this morning? I guess it was yesterday morning. Trump's Customs and Border Protection troops, the CPB, it was Tuesday, reportedly hit women, children, and journalists near the U.S.-Mexico border with tear gas, smoke, and pepper spray. Which raises an interesting question. I mean, this is the John Kelly, policy of Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Kirstjen Nielsen. This is their policy: is make it very, very painful for people. Take their children away from them. Hit them with tear gas. Make it very painful for people who are fleeing for their lives to get into the United States. Just think about this for a minute. Think about your own home. Think about your children, if you've had children, if you have children, or somebody else's kids for that matter, if you don't. And think about what it would take for you to get out of bed one morning and say to your family, pull together everything that you can carry in a backpack out of this house. Pull together everything. we're going to walk 1,000 miles. We're going to face criminals. We're going to face robbers and rapists and murderers. We're going to face human traffickers. We're going to face drug lords. We're going to travel through. We're going to face disease. We're going to face hunger. That's how important it is to these people. Can you imagine what it would take? How bad life would have to be, how desperate you'd have to be before you would take that journey? Shouldn't we be taking seriously the desperation of these people? Harry Reid points out, he said, this is in an interview yesterday, Harry is 79 years old and he's dying from pancreatic cancer right now. Certainly someone to keep in your thoughts or prayers. In talking about Donald Trump, he says, Trump is an interesting person. He is not immoral, he is amoral. Amoral, Harry Reid says, is when you shoot someone in the head and it doesn't make a difference. You have no conscience. He goes on to say, I think without question he's the worst president we've ever had. We've had some bad ones, but there's not even a close second to him. He'll lie, he'll cheat, you can't reason with him. So, the second question for the morning, I suppose, is do you think that Donald Trump is immoral or amoral? Does he know that it's wrong to sleep with hookers when your wife just gave birth? Not hookers, excuse me. Porn stars and Playboy bunnies? Does he, and by the way, I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Warren, wherever she teaches at Harvard, so just for the record. So anyhow, is it wrong? Does Donald Trump know that it's wrong to sleep with these women, or does he simply not understand right from wrong and therefore thinks he can get away with anything? Does he feel shame or guilt? Or does he merely understand the norms of society? This is how high-functioning sociopaths operate. They understand what people expect of them. They understand what the standards of society are. They can even act contrite and embarrassed, although they're not feeling any of those things. What they're actually feeling is, that they're getting away with something. So is Trump merely immoral, or is he fully amoral? Because amoral means he's a full-functioning sociopath. I believe the latter. I believe that we have a man in the White House right now who is a high-functioning sociopath. And I think that the rest of the world is figuring that out. And, over the weekend, President Xi in China said that the ultimate goal of China's policies is to end the democracy, the experiment of democracy and home rule in Taiwan, to merge Taiwan back into China. It's got a lot of people in China or in Taiwan gulping. This could be the beginning of World War III. Do you want a sociopath in the White House if it happens? The flashpoints in the Middle East. The economy melting down. The Dow is down 200-300 points this morning. I'm not sure where it is right now, but it's still down. Are these the kind of times when it's uniquely dangerous to have a sociopath in the White House, or is it always dangerous? And do you think that maybe he's just immoral? Maybe he's just a bad guy who revels in his badness?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So a lot on the table and more of the news of the day, as I said, and we'll get to all that. We'll pick up your phone calls right after the break. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call, rather they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just two quick points, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. Connie Schultz is Sherrod Brown's wife. He is her husband. And Politico did an article about Elizabeth Warren. And Politico is apparently following in the footsteps of cable TV news. And that is, don't ever talk about issues, just talk about personality and horse race. And so the headline that Politico tweeted out was, how does Elizabeth Warren avoid a Clinton redux, written off as too unlikable before her campaign gets off the ground? Unlikable. This was Politico's take on it. And Connie Schultz, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and the wife of Senator Sherrod Brown, himself a progressive that I would support in a heartbeat running for president of the United States. And he may well be in the race. Connie Schultz tweets out, we could start, and in response to Politico, she retweets the Political article and says, we could start by treating women as candidates for president, not homecoming queen. Isn't she likable? Come on. Elizabeth Warren also came out yesterday and said that she supports the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal moves the United States to 100% electric in 10 years. How do you do that? Well, here's a tip. This is from Norway. And this from Reuters by Camilla Knudsen and Alistair Doyle. In a bid to cut carbon emissions and air pollution, Norway exempts battery-driven cars from most taxes and offers benefits such as free parking and charging points to hasten the shift from diesel and petrol engines. So last year, 2018, electric cars represented almost a third of all cars sold in Norway, 31%. The year before that, 2017, it was 20%. And back in 2013, it was only 5%. So it's exploded. And they fully believe, the Norwegian Electric Car Association believes, or Electric Vehicle Association, believes that next year, this year, 2019, it's going to be 75% of their market. This is the impact of policy. This is why I keep saying, you can live simply and walk to work. I mean, I do that. By the way, I'm just amazed having a plug-in hybrid. The Prius, the plug-in part, it only lasts, it only drives me about 30 miles, which is basically a gallon of gasoline, and it takes 5 hours overnight to charge. But it's 4 out of 5, maybe even 8 out of 9 trips that Louise and I take are 100% electric because we typically don't drive more than 30 miles round trip. And so, so we're averaging, I think, 116 miles per gallon right now, compared with, and plus we've got cheap electricity because, it's powered by the Bonneville Dam. It's hydropower, and the local utility offers you a super cheap rate if you charge overnight. It's incredible. We should all be doing this. I mean, but anyhow, Elizabeth Warren has come out in support of this. So here's all the things that are going on. And Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom.
Hey, Jared.
I want to talk about the Democratic 2020 Democratic nominees.
Mm-hmm.
I think, sorry about that. I think Elizabeth Warren would be an okay presidential nominee, along with Bernie Sanders. And here's the thing. Whoever the Democratic nominee is, they need to pick whoever the person who came second in the nomination process as their VP. Because here's why. We don't want to have a divided party. You know what I'm saying? We don't want to have a ticket that is divided.
But what if the person who comes in what if the person who comes in first is a solid progressive and the person who comes in second is a corporate Dem, or vice versa? I mean, typically, what you're describing, Jared, has almost never happened. And the reason why Jack Kennedy picked, for example, Lyndon Johnson, was he needed the South. There's a word for it, something like it's not ticket splitting. It's an old political phrase, but basically it's that you strategically choose your vice presidential candidate to bring you regions of the country or demographics that you wouldn't otherwise have. It's why Barack Obama chose Joe Biden. Barack Obama was seen as the outsider, as the kind of radical new guy who was running on hope and change. His campaign suggested that he was going to govern as a real progressive, but he had to reassure the corporate Democrats that he wasn't, Bernie Sanders. And so the way he did that was by putting Joe Biden on the ticket.
That is true, and he did do that. But I think the reason why I suggest just picking whoever came in second, simply so we don't have a repeat of 2016, when a lot of people just stayed home because Hillary Clinton didn't pick Bernie Sanders as the nominee
or Elizabeth Warren. I thought that a Clinton-Warren ticket would just be gangbusters, and I continue to believe that even though people say, "Whoa, 2 women," the same people 8 years earlier were saying a black guy whose middle name is Hussein. It's come on, it's possible in America. It's 2019. But yeah, Jared, I get your point, and we'll see how it shakes out. We'll just have to see how it shakes out. Thanks a lot for the call, Dave in St. Paul, Minnesota, or Nebraska. Excuse me, Dave in St. Paul, Nebraska. What's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Dave.
I'm concerned about your quote about the battling of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
And Sherrod Brown, actually. I think the 3 of them are the top competitors for who's a real progressive.
Yeah, I hate to see that argument go on about who's the most progressive and have.
No, I'm not saying who's the most progressive. I think out of the 3, clearly Bernie's the most progressive. But the question is, there's basically 2 factions in the Democratic Party, and maybe a third if you include Michael Bloomberg. The first are the genuine progressives, people who have a genuine, solid background that nobody can dispute. That's Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Sherrod Brown. Then you've got the sort of progressive, certainly socially progressive, but still willing to work with big corporations and don't want to really shake the system up too much. The Cory Bookers, the Kamala Harrises, the Beto O'Rourkes. And then you've got Michael Bloomberg and maybe a few other right-wingers, billionaires or whatever, who are going to come in and try to represent the Jamie, but whatever, the conservative wing of the party. Back to you, Dave. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I understand that, and like the previous caller, I would really think we would be stronger if they would more united rather than being pitted against each other and have to elect somebody from the other.
But the fact of the matter is, Dave, that in a primary you have people competing with each other. There's no way around that. At some point, we're all going to have to decide. And, state by state, caucus by caucus, election by election, primary by primary, we're going to decide who's going to be the Democratic nominee. And the opening bell of that was Elizabeth Warren's announcement, I think in a big way. And, we'll see where it goes. Dave, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Scott in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to talk about Trump and the issue of his pathology or psychopathy. I believe he is amoral, and he exhibits all the signs of a true psychopath, which are prevalent in our society and represented in a small percentage of it, but they're overrepresented in positions of authority in both corporations and in government because they're willing to do what it takes to win. And that's what it's all about for these guys. And Trump, he'll tell you that's all. He's a winner, right?
Yep. Yeah. No, I get it, and I agree with your assessment. I think that Donald Trump is a psychopath, and that is a dangerous thing for America. But yeah, spot on, Scott. I completely agree. Haji in Frederick, Maryland, you wanted to weigh in on the Donald Trump morality tale here?
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, he's absolutely amoral. He knows what's wrong, but he still tries to get away with doing wrong.
Yeah. And he's been rewarded for that his entire life until now. And,
which is a shame.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, has the train run out? I mean, is this the end of it? We'll find out. Haji, thank you for the call. Lawrence in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for listening to AM 950. What's up?
Hey, I was going to talk about Elizabeth Warren, but I'll just quickly go into this thing about Donald Trump, Trump's amorality or immoral. If we accuse him of being amoral, we'll actually have to accuse most people like him of being the same. I'll give you an example. Because he's been so protected, so cocooned by white privilege, that he doesn't understand what's wrong, what's detrimental to somebody else.
And by the privilege of wealth, Lawrence, as well.
Yes, by the privilege of wealth as well. I'll give you an example of the young lady that just killed an entire family. She was on text messaging while the school bus was at a stop, and she just ran right through the stop sign. She had no clue what was right or wrong. She was so protected by privilege and by being in that rich society that she never experienced it. She doesn't even know that she had to stop at a stop sign. That was her conclusion. Here's another example of the recent cruise ship deaths. People dying on cruise ship. They're all been a certain age, from 20 to 27 years old. And I guarantee you, by studying that, you will find that they are the most privileged ones, and they have no distinction between what's right and wrong and what's dangerous or not dangerous. So therefore, they take chances like that. And that's the same with Donald Trump. You would have to say that everybody like him who's been privileged to wealth and white privilege, that they are immoral. So we just can't do that. So what we really have to do is analyze and try to break down and understand their privilege and try to counteract that privilege. And that's how we deal with the question of his amoral or immorality, per se.
Well, I think those are all good and important points, Lawrence. I'm not certain that privilege leads to sociopathy, though. I mean, if that's the argument you're making, and also 20 to 29 that's peak drinking era, and certainly people who are blinded by their privilege are going to be, even probably more blinded by alcohol on top of that. So those things compound each other. I get that, but
right.
I've often wondered about this because there isn't a good body of science on the prevalence of sociopathy in our society. Is it associated with class? And if it's associated with race, it's almost certainly a function of class or a function of privilege versus institutional racism, being kept down. But I think that we need to separate those two things and look at them separately. Privilege is an issue in and of itself, but so is sociopathy.
Right. No, I agree, and I think that's the point I was making.
Oh, okay.
Let's draw a distinction between what is amoral and what is and how a particular individual has been affected by his socioeconomical environment.
Right. So in Trump, we've got the perfect storm. You've got a guy who was raised with both white privilege and wealth privilege, and so was from the get-go blinded to the consequences of many of his actions. And then you layer that with his being a sociopath or a psychopath, so he doesn't care what the consequences of his actions are. And, it's the perfect storm, and that's what's sitting in the White House right now. A scary thought.
Wow. And Tom, this is where the two thoughts, your thoughts and my thoughts, that's where they merge, man.
That's the intersection.
I just want to reiterate to all your listeners what you just said. The danger here is that we got this guy that controls everything sitting in the most highest office. And if we don't have grounds for impeachment, we have to do it now. And, but I won't take up any more of your time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, you said it well, Lawrence. And this is why, I think that Mitt Romney, you've got guys who are right-wing crazies who are steeped in white privilege and power privilege, like Mitt Romney, but probably not a psychopath. And Thomas Friedman, who's a billionaire, but probably not a psychopath. And they're openly calling Donald Trump basically a psychopath and saying, got to get rid of this guy. Spot on. Lawrence, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So do you think it's even possible that the news networks are ever going to talk about Elizabeth Warren's issues, policies? We'll be back. And welcome back. Daniel in Manchester, New Hampshire. Hey, Daniel, you're at the Iowa and New Hampshire, I guess, are ground zero, aren't they, for these coming primaries?
I was actually listening to NPR this morning, and they said that they're considering moving New Hampshire's primary up to, I believe, February.
Yeah. Because Iowa's is in February.
I'm sorry?
Iowa is in February.
Yeah, oh, okay. Well, I just heard they were going to move us up because California's moved up sooner, right?
Yeah, they. I don't know if they did it or they were just talking about it. I need to catch up on that. But yeah, it's every, and there was another large state that was thinking about moving up too, and I don't know if they did or not. But anyhow, your thoughts on Elizabeth Warren?
So let me preface this by saying I loved Elizabeth Warren. I said in maybe 2014, but definitely 2015, that the perfect ticket would be Sanders Warren.
Mm-hmm.
But she lost me. She never endorsed Bernie, and then she ended up actually kind of flipping, as far as I'm concerned, and endorsing Hillary. That being said, I'd still support her, but that...
well, she endorsed Hillary after Bernie lost the primary, didn't she?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure she endorsed Hillary before the primary was over.
I would look that up before I assert that.
Okay. Well, my thought on Warren is that she's kind of the bridge between the standard Democrat and the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. She's the good middle of the road from the middle to the left.
Yeah, because Bernie is viewed as kind of this lefty ideologue ever since he was a kid, which kind of cuts both ways. On the one hand, I mean, there's that iconic picture of him at the age of 19 having chained himself to a black woman outside.
To a black lady, yes, sir.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you establish your cred better than that? You just don't. I mean, and on the other hand, you've got some people who in the Democratic Party who are concerned that ideology may make it difficult for Bernie to be sufficiently pragmatic to get things done, that it's going to be my way or the highway, it's got to be right or it can't be at all. I don't think that's true, frankly.
The radical idea is that, one person should be beneath another.
Yeah, exactly.
That's radical.
Yeah, and that's not my critique of Bernie, by the way. I'm still a Bernie fan, and I would vote for Bernie in a heartbeat if he was the nominee. But I think that said, that right now we've got a really interesting field of candidates and a lot of options for actual progressives to pick from. So what's your sense of New Hampshire's response? I mean, you're the state right next to Massachusetts where Elizabeth Warren is from.
I wish I could give you hope in that. We went a little bit more progressive in terms of local state races, but we still have Governor Sununu, and we still have some deep red roots here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so you've got a Republican governor now, still.
Well, he still, second term, I believe.
This is John Sununu's son, as I recall.
Yes, sir.
Wow, yeah, because Sununu was the governor, I think, when Louise and I lived there back in the 80s. Amazing stuff. Well, Daniel, we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out, and thanks a lot for the call.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, indeed. And hope all is well in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We're gonna hit a break here in about 4 seconds, and we'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day as we continue. I see Elizabeth Warren's on TV right now. Real interesting to see if the media will ever cover actual issues, or whether it's going to be, is she too progressive? Not enough progressive? Is she how? It so frustrates me the way that these guys do this. We'll be back. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and John in Rolling Meadows, Illinois. Hey, John, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. You're upset with me, it says?
What's that?
It says here you're upset with me?
Well, I'm not upset with you. I just don't understand why you continue to call this man a psychopath.
Because I believe he is.
Well, no, when you look up the definition, he absolutely is not. So it's amazing to me that you continue to claim something that is just ridiculously
What part of the
absurd.
definition of psychopath is Donald Trump?
A person suffering from chronic mental disorder with abnormal or violent social behavior. Now, you want to tell me when Trump has displayed violent or social behavior?
Sure, calling for the murder, the death of 5 young black men who were initially charged with raping a woman in Central Park, and then DNA, not only DNA, but a confession by a white guy who actually did it, comes out, and and he to this day is continuing to call for the death of them. What he's doing in the southern border down there, lobbing tear gas, and you've got I think 18 children have now died in U.S. custody, tearing families apart. This guy's a psychopath, John.
Tom, that is absurd, and I understand you like to make these ridiculous claims, but you continue to go ahead. He will be president in 2020. You know he will, so just continue your path. It's very, very sad that you guys talk this way.
Good luck with that, John. Jim in Poway, California. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Happy New Year.
Thanks, back at you.
Normally, I'm not a big New Year guy since I was in my 20s, but I'll tell you what, I'm so excited about this New Year because I think we've got so many things going for us. I'm in the middle of reading Bernie's Where We Go From Here, and that is an unbelievable book. I tell you, everybody should read that thing. It's just fantastic.
Okay. What were the high points for you?
Well, I've got about halfway through it, and the high points are the facts that he's pointing out. I mean, there's so much in there that is just hard to believe.
For example,
people need to read that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have not read the book. Can you give us enough information that?
Well, here I'll just read the back dust jacket. It says, "These are painful and frightening times. Many friends have told me that they dread reading the newspaper, watching TV. But let us be clear: despair is not an option." Which I love that. This struggle is not just for us; it is for our kids, our grandchildren, and the future of the planet. This book is about some of what I and millions of progressives have been trying to accomplish day by day over the last several years. Some of that work took place inside the Beltway. Much of it took outside the Beltway. But no matter where it took place, the goal has always been the same.
I get it, Jim. Jim, I want to get one last caller in here in the minute I have, but thank you for that. Vivian in Albuquerque, New Mexico, listening on 1350 AM. Vivian, what's up?
Oh, I just want to say I'm thrilled that Elizabeth Warren is running. It's time that we have a woman, and a smart woman, as president. And I think she's feisty. I think she'll stand up to Trump or Pence, and I'm just absolutely delighted. I hope she is our next president.
Yeah, amen. Amen. I agree. Thank you, Vivian. Bob in Dunn, North Carolina. Bob, you have a half a minute. You got a quick comment about Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, I've always liked Elizabeth Warren. Everything I've seen for the past numbers of years. I'm 64. She'd make a reasonable candidate for the Democrats. But when Bill Press and you, between the two of you, he called him Donald Trump a sociopath, and you called him a psychopath. The people that are like that is like Maduro, it's like Saddam Hussein, Kim Jong-il, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, and you don't think that Donald Trump would be those people if he could, Bob? I mean, those are the people he's praising.
And they listen to you guys, and they believe what you say.
Okay, Bob, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's, in the next hour, Congressman Mark Pocan. It's going to be Middays with Mark here. It is Wednesday, after all. Yeah, it feels like Monday. I mean, it's just, Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan will be taking your calls for the hour, so stick around and get in queue if you want to ask him any questions or lobby him or whatever it may be. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here. You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's Wednesday. It's midweek, so it's time for, and it's midday, time for Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, along with Pramila Jayapal. He represents the state of Wisconsin's 2nd district in Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives. And his website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N, his website, and you can tweet him. His Twitter handle is Rep Mark Pocan, as in Representative Rep Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program. Happy New Year's. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on what are the biggest issues of the day, the biggest news of the day. And I'm also curious your thoughts on Elizabeth Warren announcing her candidacy for president, or, her opening a what's it called, exploratory committee.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, and Happy New Year to all your listeners and to you, Tom. It's a good day tomorrow with Congress changes. Democrats will be in control. We're going to vote on right away a couple of measures that are sending to the Senate, a budget bill that would fund Homeland Security, I think, until February 8th, I believe is the date, and then also a bill to fund all the other agencies that are out there, which I think is another 6 through the end of September, our fiscal year. And, the ball's back in their court. Essentially, it's very similar to what the Senate sent to us that the president originally agreed to before, a few talking heads convinced him to do otherwise, and then we started the shutdown, which, of course, was very convenient for him to get off the subject of Michael Cohen and the Mueller investigation and everything else that's been haunting him. So we'll see, but at least tomorrow we'll show that Democrats have an alternative, that we want to reopen the government, and the ball will largely be in the president's court. And I know that they're all meeting today, and I don't know, perhaps something will come out of that, but that's the plan we have right now.
Yeah, very interesting. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So, and your thoughts on how the 2020 race might be shaping up?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I think there's going to be a lot of people kicking the tires on this. Elizabeth Warren, is someone who I think a lot of us last time were surprised she didn't get in the race. She kind of was an interesting figure that could have really, I think, been a strong voice. She certainly will be this time. A lot of us in the progressive movement have enormous respect for her. A lot of other candidates are going to be in that race. In fact, someone who's a good friend in Washington, who used to be a chief of staff for Dave Obey, said he keeps a list of everyone this last year who went to the first 4 primary states who have an outside pay consultant and a third factor. I'm forgetting what it is offhand. And he has a list of 42 names that are kicking the tires right now about running for president. So, I think this is the first of probably a lot of folks doing that. But Elizabeth Warren certainly is going to be one of the major names if she gets in the race, without question. She and Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and some others are the big names.
Wow. Okay. So let's pick up some phone calls here for you.
Sure. Absolutely.
Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Joseph in Los Angeles. Hey, Joseph, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good, Joseph. Thank you.
Good. Well, I was just calling really because, I wanted to kind of blow the whistle on something, but I don't know if people are ready to handle it. I was looking into the fires up in Northern California, and I see that the fire captains are saying that those fires are not normal and they've never seen anything like it. So if you want to look at a YouTube channel that's going to break it all down for you, look at A Plain Truth.
Yeah. Joseph, I don't want to be promoting YouTube channels on here. We really need to have callers who want to ask a question of Congressman Pocan. I'm sorry, Mark, or Congressman. Terry in Tucson, Arizona, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. I wanted to just mention that I'm hearing callers talk about sociopaths, aka psychopaths, in one vein, and that is as serial killers or violent.
Terry, that topic is from the previous hour. I'm sorry. Congressman Pocan is taking calls. Charlie in Madison, Wisconsin. Charlie, you got a question for Congressman Pocan?
Well, yeah, I do. It's one of the first things you guys are going to be voting on is something called pay as you go. Point of order. Is that something you're in favor of, or are you going to vote no on that?
Yeah, so this is one that there's incredible misinformation. Thank you for bringing it up, Charlie. There is in statute a pay-go rule that says for you to do something like a Medicare for all or anything that you have to be able to pay for it, whether it be cuts or tax increases. The Republicans had a policy called cut-go, and we are completely getting rid of that, that you have to only cut in order to pay for something. The problem is we have a rules package that's up that mentions pay-go, and there's a lot of people who think that alone is the issue, when the issue is actually the statute. In the rules package, they kept pay-go language, and everyone thinks that's a backdoor way to stop big ideas from happening. The reality is, if you don't have pay-go in the rules package and it's in statute, anything that would happen big would have to then, the funding decisions for pay-go, where you get the funding from, would come then from the Senate or the president, which both are Republican. So this is not a proposal to have it. We can waive it and have waived it many times previously. This is merely keeping it in the rules package to not give up the Democratic House's authority. However, right now, Pramila Jayapal and I think are going to be announcing introducing a bill to get rid of the statute pay-go. That's what actually matters. So people are getting a little lost online right now. I've watched a lot of Twitter traffic where the rule is not the problem. In fact, the rule helps keep the House Democrats involved in any decision-making as long as there's a statute. What we need to do is get rid of the statute. So I really appreciate the question. Yeah, the law, because people are getting way off on the rule, and if you actually didn't have it in a rule, and this is something we have concerns clearly about pay-go. There's no way we'd like to get rid of the statute, the law for it. But if you just get rid of it as a rule, you would be giving up the House's ability to have any control on it. You'd give it to the Republican Senate and the Republican president. So we need to deal with the statute, but a lot of people online right now are getting lost on the rule, and we're hoping to provide some clarity very soon on this because it's starting to spin a little bit out of control, and I appreciate that question, Charlie.
Cheryl in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Representative Pocan. First, happy New Year to both of you there.
Thank you.
Back in the, the military budget is triple what it was in the 90s under Bill Clinton, and I was fighting militarism then. When I went to college, and I'm 66, there was a program called the National Defense student loan program that was some kind of a rider on a defense appropriation bill that created a program with a 3% interest at the time, 3% interest rate for student loans, for college loans. Those were pretty easy to pay off. I paid mine off, and it helped me to get through college. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the program Elizabeth Warren had. She's in my age bracket. I think that with the House now being in the hands of the Democrats, if the next appropriation for the military or even as separate legislation, you could get a student loan program that's funded by the military appropriations. Can you comment on that idea?
Yeah, it's something I think we could look at. You're right. We're definitely going to be talking about funding for higher education. We'll also be talking about apprenticeships, other ways to get higher skills to get a better paying job. But around college affordability, there's a couple of measures out there. There's some free tuition measures that take care of partial expenses, just tuition. There's some debt-free college proposals that take care of your living expenses, books, and college, and that's something I know that we've been very strongly with the Progressive Caucus. And then there's also things like repaying debt and other measures that the Republicans try to get rid of, like people in public service jobs who've been able to relieve some of their debt. So we need to have a big kind of picture look at all sorts of aspects of this. It's now the second largest consumer debt that's out there, and I think you'll see that this session for sure.
Yeah, wonderful. And if we could take a bite out of the hide of the Department of Defense to pay for student loans, or for free college. I mean, shades of the GI Bill, right? Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Representative Mark Pocan, his Twitter handle, Rep. Mark Pocan. You can find his website at pocan, pocan.house.gov. And welcome back. Larry in Natchez, Mississippi. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Larry. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pocan?
Yes. Hi, Larry.
What I want to ask, I'm usually vote Republican, but the subject today was presidential candidates for the Democrat. My opinion would be Senator Joe Manchin. What do you think about him?
Yeah,
I
don't think Senator Manchin
I think he carries himself well.
I don't think he has any interest in running. He's not been on the list of like I mentioned, 42 people who've been kind of traveling to some of the primary states, kicking the tires. I think you've got some really big names in there like Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, and I shouldn't start going down the list, Beto O'Rourke, because there's a lot of big names and there's a lot of names that people may not have heard of, but have various positions as mayors, governors, members of Congress that are also looking at it. But Manchin's not been mentioned at any list, so I don't think that that's probably a probability.
Ann in Kankakee, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. Just a quick question, because I heard your earlier call about the PAYGO.
Yeah.
Is the progressive, and by the way, we saw you 2 years ago at the People's Summit. You are awesome, and thank you for being there in Congress for us. But just a quick question. Do you think you have enough of a large enough caucus with the progressive members of Congress to change the statute on PAYGO?
Well, that's the thing. We're right now, in fact, I talked to Jim McGovern this morning. Getting rid of the rule does nothing. In fact, it hurts us. So there really is some bad misinformation out there. PAYGO as a policy is a bad policy, but having it in the rules is not the law. And what we need to go is go after that law. So, we'll try to do that, and we'll see. But one of the things that's happened previously when Democrats are in control is they waive it. You can waive it at any time. So it's one of these kind of silly federal things that you don't have to do.
Hang on just a second. You're saying you can waive the rule, but you can't waive the law?
No, you can actually. That's the thing, is you can waive it as if it's a bill coming through. So, for example, we're getting commitments if we get a vote on Medicare for All that PAYGO is waived and it doesn't have to apply. But if we don't have it in the rules to do that, it would automatically give the authority to the Republican Senate or the Republican President, which is not a good idea. So getting rid of the law PAYGO is a very good idea. But in the rules, people are getting a little lost between the rule and the statute. And what we need to do is introduce a bill. Now, whether or not we have the votes to do that, I don't know. But the fight in the rules is actually not the answer, and people are, I think, confused on this, at least from all the social media traffic I'm following right now.
So we need our listeners and viewers who have active social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, to point out that keeping the PAYGO in the House rules allows the House, the Democrats in the House, to basically have an equal say with the Republicans in the Senate and the White House on PAYGO because it's still in the law. And the real effort should not be getting rid of the House rule, it should be getting rid of the law. Am I boiling that down right?
Yeah, and I think right now we're in the process of putting out a statement saying that to try to help get that out there. The problem is a couple members jumped early today because they followed some social media traffic and someone in the Senate who didn't understand the process, and now we're kind of untangling things a little bit.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah. Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, coming up on 19 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. Stick with us. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Our Roberta in Poway, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. Your show is a gift, and thank you for inviting the congressman. I'm calling about something I've not seen in print media, cable, broadcast, TV, or radio, and that's coverage of Steve Bannon, who's doing a celebrity tour all over the EU, preaching nationalism in the name of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of coverage of that either. In fact, it's funny, I watched last night the Michael Moore movie, 11/9, and it was funny to watch, seeing that inaugural and all the people that were with him, including Steve Bannon and some of the faces of the past, and, seeing the great influence they wound up having even when they're not there, the influence they've had with Donald Trump and with this White House. So, this is a movement we're seeing across Europe, too, with the nationalism, and this is something that we need to deal with, right here first. But it is part and part of what they've been trying to do is lead this around the world, and, we've got to deal with it with Donald Trump before it gets beyond being able to manage.
Yeah, amen. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, did you call me?
I did. You're on the air.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you say my name. Hi, thank you for taking my call, Congressman Pocan.
Well, sure.
My question is probably something that you've heard a lot, but it concerns me, the idea of impeachment. And it wasn't supposed to be talked about before the election, but to me it becomes so political. When does it become important that we do the right thing instead of worrying about our power? And
sure.
Are we going to take this on and go forward, whether they keep telling us that there's enough votes in the Senate or not? Because I think that could happen anyway. But I'm really hoping that the Democrats take it seriously and do the right thing. Can you tell me how you feel about this?
So this is, I think we've laid out the math previously that with the House, there's no way it was going to happen under the Republican control. Now the Democrats are in control. We still have a Republican Senate. So I was heartened to see Mitt Romney's column that he wrote. Seems like he might be willing to take on some of the responsibilities no other Republican has, which is calling out this president. We'll see if he actually votes that way. He doesn't just say that in a column. But we need to also have it go through the Senate. So we need to be able, through our hearing process, the Democrats will do immediately to start looking at a variety of misdeeds by this White House and this president. By the Mueller investigation, I think you're going to need some of that might in order to get the votes you need in the Senate. But clearly, the last few weeks have been very, very troubling to all of us. I think many of us are ready to vote impeachment, but if you can't get it through the Senate, you don't pass it. So we have to do everything we can to make sure that you can get it done through the Senate. And my guess is the Mueller investigation is the single biggest convincer, but having our own hearings and the information we get could also lead us to that point.
Chris in Corrales, New Mexico. Hey, Chris, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking my call. I was wondering about the ruling where the judge said that Trump had to return all the children to their parents by X amount of dates, which hasn't been done. Him poo-pooing the law like he does, doesn't that make everybody else feel like, why should we follow the law too? And what's going on with that? Why haven't they followed through or filed contempt of court with him?
Yeah, they're in a legal battle over it still, I believe. And this is just one of the worst things, I think, and it's hard in an administration with so many bad ideas. This is one of the worst, separating parents from their children at the border. And now we've had 2 deaths. Many of us have been at the border and visited these facilities, and this is just not what the United States is about, and Donald Trump has been a reprehensible human being for doing this, and the courts understand that this needs to change, but they're still fighting it. We're able now, hopefully, to fight it via the appropriations process through hearings and other ways, but this is probably one of the biggest dark marks on this administration, what he's doing under the guise of the country, just so that he can have a proving point on a wall. And I'm hoping that now we're in the majority starting tomorrow, we'll be able to get far deeper into this and really be able to get something changed.
Ian in Modesto, California, just a minute and a half to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. Ian, quick question for Congressman Pocan.
Hey, I'll be real quick, guys, and Happy New Year to you both.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, I'm out here in California, District 10. We just elected Josh Harder, and we're all about the blue wave. I'm just wondering, with this past election, and we've had so many rookie congressmen and women come in, is there a concern that there's not enough experience taking over? Is that something that maybe we should be a little concerned about?
No, there's still, most of the folks who are committee chairs, and I think we have 13 that are Progressive Caucus members that are in the new Congress are pretty experienced people. They've been around for a while. And having the new energy and new perspectives, I think, is always healthy for an institution. And quite honestly, Nancy Pelosi, her many years of leadership makes her a very savvy negotiator. She's in a good position when you have a Republican Senate, a Republican president. So I'm not at all concerned about the new folks coming in. In fact, just the opposite. I think their energy and their ideas and not being maybe in the system and being worn down over the last 8 years of having nothing happen since 2010 and the rise of the Tea Party might be very good.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan's website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, as in Representative Mark Pocan. And we will be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark. Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter or first essay is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. That feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman, I see that the whole PAYGO thing is still exploding. It's at the top of Common Dreams. It's all over Twitter. Just as a public service here, could you very, very quickly restate what the heck is going on here and why? Apparently, it was Ocasio-Cortez and Ro Khanna who started this stampede, or at least they're the ones at the top of the New York Times on it. What did they miss? What did they get wrong?
So what's happening is someone in the Senate kind of put out that the rules, the issue, and they don't understand how the House rules work versus the Senate rules. So let me read you the statement that Pramila Jayapal and I are putting out at this moment. We've been concerned about PAYGO for months. They've had numerous conversations with Rules Chairman Jim McGovern and House leadership about those concerns. We all agree that the real problem with PAYGO exists in the statute that requires it. That is why we'll be introducing legislation in the 116th Congress to end PAYGO. In the meantime, Chairman McGovern and House leadership has committed to us that PAYGO will not be an impediment to advancing key progressive priorities in the 116th Congress. With the assurances that PAYGO can be waived, we do plan to vote for the House rules package and proceed with the legislation to fix the statute. The real problem, and that's the end of the statement, is the statute. And if we don't have it in rules, the law, which is, in statute. The problem in the rules part, if we don't have it in rules, we give up our ability to waive it. We give up our ability to use it if we ever would use it, which, again, it's not being used to stop progressive policies. If you don't have it in there, the ability to find the money for anything that would pass would go to the Senate and the President. The Senate's under Republican control, as is the White House. So we kind of have to keep it in there to have prerogative still on it. It's a bad policy. Cut-go is even worse, where you could only cut to fund something. PAYGO says you could raise taxes or cut. We're saying you shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to put good ideas out there and would have other ways of dealing with the revenue side or the how to find the revenue for it, whether it be cuts or otherwise. But you don't need a prescriptive law for it. Again, the rule doesn't do that. It's in statute. And until it's out of statute, you have the problem. If you don't have it in a rule, you take away the House Democrats' ability to waive or to enact it as necessary.
Right. And for people who don't recognize that word, statute means it's the law of the land. It's a law. Correct. It was passed by Congress.
We can't change the law in a rule. A rule is a separate process.
Right. Got it. Deacon in Boulder Creek, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman.
Hi, Deacon.
I'm afraid this court's set to overturn the exclusionary rule. And that will make the Fourth Amendment meaningless. Before that rule, cops searched anybody they wanted to, anytime they wanted to. Democrats got to do something about this Supreme Court, or we're headed for a police state.
The exclusionary rule being the one that evidence that's seized during criminal behavior on the part of the police can't be used against the person that evidence was gathered against, right, Deacon?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, Congressman?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I missed the question. I apologize.
He said he's concerned that the Supreme Court may be fixing to blow up the exclusionary rule, and he's very concerned that if Democrats don't do something about the Supreme Court right now, that we could end up in a police state.
Gotcha. Yeah, unfortunately, with having just the House alone, we're not able to do a whole lot about the Supreme Court right now. I mean, the Senate still has the oversight as far as the nominations. And hopefully we won't have any nominations coming up very soon because, we know some of the folks that are in line could be good progressive voices. So I don't have a great answer for you, Deacon, because just having the House alone isn't enough to fully impact the Supreme Court.
Michael in Wheaton, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. Thanks for taking my call, guys. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want to talk about the student loan issue. So I'm a 33-year-old millennial who went to school, got my bachelor's degree. I make about $60,000 a year, and I have to live at home with my parents because I'm spending $1,000 a month in my student loan debt. And to me, that's just nuts. So my question, Congressman, is, what can we do about all of us who went to school and played by the rules, and now we're stuck with all this debt?
Yeah. So can I ask what your interest rate is, Michael? Do you know offhand?
I just dropped him. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I mean, one, most immediately, there's a bill that we introduced back in 2013, the first in the nation, and then later Senator Warren and Senator Gillibrand each introduced a version for refinancing of student debt. That's one thing for people with existing debt. Some people have like 6.6% interest when that's clearly not the interest rate right now. You can refinance your house, your car, but you can't your student debt easily. There's some ways to consolidate, but it's not necessarily an easy process. So that's one way you could do it. There's other ways that we have loan repayment for people in public service jobs. In other areas, there's also bigger ways to look at how we're funding education with it going this expensive. Can we deal with it up front? And that's where I think some of the new bills that we've put out there, the debt-free college bill and some of the other bills that are out there, are trying to deal with it up front, so you don't have to deal with this problem later. The average person leaving, like the University of Wisconsin, a great public institution, is close to $30,000 right now. If you go to grad school, you can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Private schools, the same. So there are a few measures that have been introduced previously. I think you're going to see more new ideas come out this session, but it's absolutely on top of mind for everyone, and we also have to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, and that might give us some opportunities to do it as well.
Ken in Great Falls, Montana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Now, please keep your mind open for a sec. I'm coming from this with the aspect that the wall is a stupid idea. But the Democrats ought to give it to Trump. We ought to give him a green wall covered in solar panels. And then the infrastructure to get the electricity up to this grid system. You could build more solar farms. Within a couple of years, you could shut down 15, maybe 20 coal-fired power plants. The electricity would pay for that part of the wall, and Trump would sign on. He's already signed on to solar panels on the wall, but really make it a big project. You could start the Green New Deal right now instead of waiting until 2020. Please look into this.
Yeah, I hear you, Ken. I know you brought this issue up before. I just don't think a good trade-off is having a giant wall at our southern border, even if it has solar panels. That's not enough to convince me. I think, what convinces me are the numbers, the net migration in the last decade we've had, the fact that, drugs mainly come in through ports of entry, not across the border. All the facts fly in the face of having a wall. So I think we've been very hard on saying we're not going to put that money out there for a wall, but we will do other border protections, other more modern ways of dealing with border protections, not like the Great Wall of China. There's a lot of new technology since then that you can do and still have the same impact. Yet I also agree with you. I have 8.5 kilowatts of solar on our house here in Wisconsin. It's a great way. We need to have more jobs right here in America on solar and wind and biomass and other ways to create fuel. So I think we can do it sooner than 2020. I think the idea was by, I think it was 2021, it might be actually in the new Green Deal, you could fully go to 100%. I think that was the idea behind it. That's why it might take longer. But right now, we can invest in things that incentivize solar and wind and other renewable technologies.
Mark in Jefferson City, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. Congressman, I think I had just briefly heard you mention in the conversation of student loan debt. Did I hear you mention something about apprenticeships? Because I'd really love to hear you expand upon that, because I'm blue collar, and over the years it seems like a part of the base that the Democrat Party has lost, some sort of apprenticeship type program done through the government to help avoid this student debt to start out with would just be politically very beneficial for the Democrat Party and
Democratic Party, Mark.
Except a lot of what they left. Could I hear you expand upon that, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So the Democratic Party, especially in the House, people like Rosa DeLauro, myself, others who sit on either the Appropriations Committee for Labor, Human Services, and Education, or the Standing Committee, which starting tomorrow will be Education and Labor again instead of Education and Workforce. We've had a number of bills introduced to deal with registered apprenticeships, so real professional apprenticeships. And, if people can get a higher skill through apprenticeships, you can get better wages for your family. Only 30% of people are going to get a 4-year degree. So what about the other 70%? And we're very high on that. I've had a bill introduced, as well as other people, to try to expand the use of registered apprenticeships, and we couldn't get it through a Republican Congress. Instead, there's been some unregistered apprenticeship talk, which is actually, they're not very good. They're kind of ways that take advantage of people to get the skills, as opposed to a professional registered one like you have most unions offer. So you will definitely see action this session from Democrats on apprenticeship bills that'll make it easier for people to get good skills to get good paying jobs.
Wonderful. Bryce in Glendale, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I'm short and quick, but basically I voted for Trump in 2016 based on the premise of what he said he was going to offer universal health care coverage for everybody that everybody could afford. And he turned his back and tried to work with Republicans and tried to kill the Affordable Care Act. And that's basically already a bad policy as it is, but it would just make it worse.
Yeah, so you're concerned. I mean, clearly, that was one of the things he said in order to get elected and didn't deliver. In fact, just the opposite. Not only did he not deliver, he worked actively against access via his attacks on the Affordable Care Act and other measures he did. One of the things I think, we can do is, one, we've got to shore up the ACA right now, because there are some issues with the death by 1,000 cuts that happened in the last several years from Republicans. But then many of us would rather be aspirational and look at Medicare for all. Canada is not a third world country. Most of Europe is not a third world country. There are really great ways to make sure that every single citizen could have access to health care, and we need to fight for that as the ultimate goal.
Representative Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Wednesday. Congressman Pocan taking your calls. His Twitter handle is Rep. Mark Pocan, as in Representative Mark Pocan. His website is pocan.house.gov. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls for Representative Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Denise in Eagle Bend, Minnesota. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call, Rep. Pocan. I'm wondering, in your opening spiel, you said that there was going to be new legislation introduced to fund the federal government. I'm wondering if between that and the other bill that Trump vetoed, is there a possibility of an override in the House and the Senate, so that if he does veto this new legislation, somehow we can get the federal government going again?
Sure, Denise, great question. So we're basically sending back the same measure and another bill to the Senate that they sent us last session, which is the current session. Tomorrow is a brand new session. So whatever we send over will have to then be passed by the Senate to be up to the president to veto. He didn't veto anything because the Senate sent us the bill that he originally agreed to, then he backed off of it, and then Paul Ryan, quietly, or not, I shouldn't say quietly, but he was afraid of Trump, and he passed the bill that Trump wanted and never tried to pass what the Senate sent us in a bipartisan way. So we're sending that back, hoping that now the Senate might want to keep government open, and we'll see what Trump does. If they pass it and the president doesn't agree, which I don't think they'll do, pass it, and he won't agree, then he could veto it. But we still have to convince them that it's the right thing to do. At least let's take the other agencies off the table. Let's get that done through September 30th, like we did earlier in the year with all the other agencies, and then let's give us till February 8th to figure this out. That's probably the least objectionable measure, and I hope that they would go for that. But whatever we send over will have to be passed by the Senate in order to go to the president, because we'll be in a new session of Congress starting tomorrow.
Tony in Utica, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Congressman Pocan. You're one of the good guys in Congress, and I wish you all the best. Listen,
Thank you.
I'm concerned about the post office and how they were brutalized by the Bush Congress back there when he was president. What is the plan of the Democrats to revive the post office and to treat them fairly? Could you address that, please?
Yeah, Tony, absolutely. I hope that we will put some legislation forward that addresses what you kind of vaguely referred to by the Bush administration, where there was a requirement put on the Postal Service to pre-fund employee benefits 75 years into the future. No other agency has this requirement. So because of it, they've got a huge financial obligation that makes it so that they're not profitable. It looks like what they're doing isn't working, which is why people like Darrell Issa and others have tried to privatize or reduce services from the post office because they use that to blame. They're saying, oh, they're not making money, when in reality, the stupid provision from the Bush administration is out there. So I hope that we would take care of that. I hope we might give them some other ways to make money. But, you know, I'll tell you, every rural part of my district, if they don't have broadband and they don't have a post office, you can't be in business in those small communities. And this is vital across the country in Democratic areas and Republican areas. So I hope that we will do something about it. But you're right. That provision is so unique and stupid. It has to be addressed.
I thought that was passed in 2005 under reconciliation, and therefore it went away in 2015. Apparently it didn't. Was I wrong?
No, it still exists, and that's part of our problem.
Amazing, amazing. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Pocan in just a moment. Pocan.house.gov. Rep. Mark Pocan on Twitter. Stick around. Here we have a whole bunch of special content, just programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook.
Back with Representative Pocan, taking your calls on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Valerie in Blanchely, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call. My question is there a chance the new Congress can do something about the Kavanaugh placement on the Supreme Court? Because it wasn't legitimate, the investigation.
Yeah, Valerie, I don't believe so. There could be a hearing to look at some of the things that came up that weren't looked at by the Senate or the House during the investigation. But, you know, because we only have the House of Representatives and the main power and that goes to the Senate, I'm not sure if there's anything directly we can do. I know that there was talk about trying to get to some of the information, and perhaps that could be under the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee, for example. However, I know that they're going to have their hands pretty full dealing with the White House right away as well. So I would have to check with Jerry Nadler, and I'll do that. But I'm not sure if there is something we can do just having the House of Representatives.
My understanding from reading the legal blogs is that if the House were to initiate an investigation of why did more than 90% of Kavanaugh's stuff get buried and those kind of things. And they could find some smoking guns that would really reflect poorly on him. That then could lead the House to initiate an impeachment proceeding. And if the evidence was as obvious as it was in the Nixon case, the Senate might even vote to impeach him. I mean, that, again, it would take 2/3, but that's the only route that I'm seeing anybody talking about is impeachment.
Yeah, and some people did talk about hearings at that time. I just know right now there's so many things that the Mueller investigation isn't looking at that needs to be looked at on the Trump administration. I know those have been some of the priorities coming out of the committees that have oversight responsibilities.
Yeah, amen. Adam in New Orleans, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. What can we do to assure that the DNC does not put their finger hard on the scales? I really felt like progressives were defrauded, and I don't want to see that again. What are your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I think one of the good things that came out of the last year with DNC was they did this process that got rid of the number of superdelegates, so you don't have this upside-down system where so many people have already made their opinion before voters have voted, and states that voted for one candidate gave more delegates to another candidate because of so many superdelegates. So that's been largely taken care of. For example, me as a member of Congress, after a first round of ballots, I have a vote, but I don't on the first round because we're trying to make it really more based on the outcome of an election or a caucus in any particular state. So I think that's positive. I think, I've got some confidence in Tom Perez. I had a lot more in Keith Ellison. Unfortunately, he's stepping down from the DNC to be the Attorney General of Minnesota. But I think, we've got some safeguards in place now that will at least not have the same situation set up where you'll have so many people voting before anyone has actually voted in a polling place that really skew who can win.
Kevin in Santa Fe, New Mexico, listed on 1260 AM. You're on with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call, Representative Pocan. And I'd like to ask if you could hyper support a shift to renewable with bills from Congress. I know that you don't have the Senate yet, that incentivize rather than put hurdles in front of going solar and renewable and have a real national moonshot to go this way, because I believe it's very critical. Thank you.
That's the Green New Deal, isn't it, Congressman?
Well, the Green New Deal is looking at it in a long-term picture. How do we make sure we have 100% by a certain year? But I think what Kevin's bringing up, and I agree with, is there are things we can do right now. And through tax code, for example, you can incentivize people. When we got our solar, there was, I think, a 30% federal tax credit plus a state credit, which made it a little easier. A lot of those things, in fact, the federal credit runs out at a certain year, so we could, do that. One of the things that's really necessary is more money for research and development, because a lot of the solar cells right now are made in China as opposed to here, and yet I know there's some technologies that allow you to slice the really thin cells like you need to that are being developed in the United States. If we can get those to go faster, more of that can, from the very first step, be done in the United States, which would create more jobs hopefully that you can organize and have good pay and benefits for. So I think there are things we can do in the immediacy in the next session if we can get the Senate and the President to go along.
Congressman, we have about 55 seconds to the end of the hour, not really enough to put a caller on. What are your thoughts about what we should really be paying attention to and where we should be focusing our activism in the coming week?
I think with tomorrow you'll see all the new folks come in. There'll be a lot of talk about that. And really it's the initial bills that we put out and what the Senate put out, right? It's probably going to show a good contrast. We're going to come out with H.R. 1 being a bill that has campaign finance, election, and ethics reform. We're going to put out a minimum wage bill very soon, bill on pharmaceutical drug prices. We'll be working on infrastructure and trying to do the things that we ran on November 6th and we got elected on to get those things done. So the more you can help us get those bills and get as progressive as possible policies out of those bills. There may be some times we need to activate folks to call their representatives. Let's make sure that we come out of the first 3 months with some really strong legislation that helps the American people.
Yeah, it certainly seems that that's what's going to be happening. And let's hope it continues. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Tom, and as always, appreciate it.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you and not only your family, but everybody. So, not only Phil, but also, all the people in your office and everybody. Hopefully this will be just a wonderful year for us. I'm very optimistic. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, and to you to everyone there, too. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back. Patty Lavera is going to drop by. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Specified criminal contact, proof of collusion.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our old friend Patty Lavera. She is the Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch. foodandwaterwatch.org is the website, and you can tweet her at food and, it's spelled A-N-D, food and water. Patty, welcome back to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So you guys are out there calling out the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. How has Trump put his mark? And I shouldn't just say Trump. I mean, this is just a Republican thing. As Mitt Romney pointed out in the Washington Post today, everything Trump is doing policy-wise is exactly what the Republicans all love. So I guess I should say, what has the Republican imprint on the USDA wrought?
Oh boy, well, that's a long list. There's there's changes to the way the agency is actually running. So there's a proposal to take a couple key divisions of USDA that do things like research and on economics and things like that, and move them out of Washington, D.C., which essentially moves them out of the decision making. There's, a proposal that we went through this long process for several years to try to get a farm bill done, and one of the sticking points was, what is the program that provides a safety net for hungry people? SNAP, right, which used to be called food stamps. So we got through a farm bill without really doing too much damage to that program, and just days later, the USDA announced they're going to make it harder for states to provide flexibility for folks to basically impose more work requirements so you can get that safety net benefit. So, kind of across the board, they're executing that kind of, whether it's more hostile to regulations that might protect farmers or more hostile to low-income folks who need those protections, is kind of what you would expect.
But the most egregious one, it seems, is this labeling rule on GMOs.
Right, and they had some help with that. This isn't all that new. Some of this predates the Trump administration, but they've carried on the tradition. So right before Christmas, we got a final rule from the USDA about how they're going to implement something that Congress passed 2 years ago in 2016 about how to label genetically engineered foods. And so the law that Congress passed back 2 years ago, we weren't happy with. I talked to you a bunch of times because we didn't need it. We didn't have a problem. We had Vermont had gone first and passed a really good law that was going to give consumers information on their food. And the biotech industry and the processed food industry came to Washington and said, we can't have this good state law. Congress, you have to block it. And that's what that law did. And so they said, states can't do this. We're going to have the federal government do it. USDA will write these rules, and we finally got the rules, and not surprisingly, they're not very good.
Well, it wasn't. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is just from memory here, but my recollection was that when Vermont said, "Okay, you have to say in plain English on the front of the label, whether this product contains genetically modified organisms or not," and the USDA came along and said, or the Republicans came along and said, I guess in Congress, and said, yes, we need to inform the public. The public wants to know. So we're going to put it in a QR code or whatever it's called. So there's this little, barcode or a little square block with funny little black squiggles in it that if you put that on a scanner, it will tell you whether there's a GMO in there, but there's no way you can look at the label and actually know it unless you happen to be a computer. Do I have that right?
Yeah, there's going to be scenarios that's what people get. So there's a bunch of problems with the rule that we just got, and some of those problems were baked into the law that Congress passed. One of them is the definition of what requires a label is a lot weaker than what Vermont did. Mm-hmm. And then even if you get to the point where the labeling is required, they gave companies options. So they can put it on the package with words, but they don't have to. They could use one of those other options, which includes what they call a digital scannable code, which is this QR code, which you have to have a cell phone, you have to have a smartphone, you have to have a signal, and you have to have the app that lets you read that code, which is not a label. A label is words on a package that I can use with my eyes and my hand and flip it over and read the words. And so, it really excludes a lot of people, and it's not labeling.
Yeah, this is like the Republicans saying, people want choice in education, so let's give them private for-profit schools. People want, to be able to know if their foods have genetically modified organisms, so let's bury it in a QR code. This is nuts. So, Patty, what kind of pushback is happening? What are you all doing at foodandwaterwatch.org, and how? Is there any specific legislation coming up? Are there any issues around any of these things that have to do with food stamps or GMO labeling or whatnot, where there are opportunities for citizen activism where we could be contacting our elected representatives? Is there anything happening at the state level? What's going on with all these things?
So there's places you can find to take action on food issues wherever you want, local or state or federal. When we're talking about the things we've just mentioned in terms of how USDA is running, what are we going to get from this labeling program? We do actually need Congress to rein USDA in. So this is a final rule, unfortunately, so it's moving forward, but that doesn't mean that Congress can't change it and change the law that created this final rule. And so we have a new House. As folks are getting to know their new, especially members of the House, but also members of the Senate, they need to hear that their work is not done on this. What they did in 2016 wasn't good enough, and it's not going to give people accurate labels anytime soon that are actually useful. And so Congress needs to take another shot at this and need to start hearing that. So I think, it's basically an election year already. They're going to be home a lot. You need to start talking to them about this is the kind of stuff we're going to hold you accountable on.
Yeah. Okay. Step by step. Patty, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thanks for having me.
It is always great talking with you, and I really appreciate it. Patty Lavera, she is the Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch, the website foodandwatch.org. So a lot in the news today. Elizabeth Warren has, speaking of somebody who actually is in favor of a functioning regulatory state, Elizabeth Warren has thrown her hat into the ring, saying that she is going to be running for president of the United States. And Nate, I don't know if you can pull up the second clip, the American Nightmare clip. You tell me when you got it ready. You got it ready. Okay, great. This is what you will not hear on television, right? This is, the so-called news networks really have very little interest in sharing news with you. And in fact, Connie Schultz kind of called this out. She is the wife of Sherrod Brown, who himself is probably going to be running for president, and a great progressive who I would support in a heartbeat, as is how I feel about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders as well. But Politico, sort of following in the lead of cable news, where it's okay to talk about a candidate's likability. It's okay to talk about who's ahead and who's behind. It's okay to talk about, well, is that a mistake or not? But it's not okay to discuss issues. You may not speak about and the reason why, of course, for this is that these television networks cannot survive. Their programming could not survive if the entire Republican Party boycotted them. The majority of the people who are guests on the Sunday shows are Republicans. The majority broadly, there are more Republicans on MSNBC than there are progressives running shows. Joe Scarborough, Nicole Wallace, the list goes on and on. So you cannot hurt the Republican Party if you are a cable TV network. You just can't do it. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You've got to have these guests be willing to come on your program. And therefore, you can't discuss issues. Because the vast majority of Americans want a higher minimum wage. They want Medicare for all. They want Social Security strengthened. They want the regulations that protect our air and water and allow them to be clean, even if it's less profitable for corporations. They want the right to unionize. You just go through the list, right, of the issues. And those issues may not be discussed on national network television, because that would mean revealing to Americans the actual positions of the Republican Party and the Republicans. It's okay to blame it all on Trump, but you can't. So anyhow, Connie Schultz, Politico, ran this article about Elizabeth Warren, announcing her debut. The headline, how does Elizabeth Warren avoid a Clinton redux written off as too unlikable before her campaign gets off the ground? That was the Politico headline. Connie Schultz, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and wife of Sherrod Brown as well, who knows a thing or two about politics. She said, we can start by treating women as candidates for president, not for homecoming queen. Amen. So here's the part of Elizabeth Warren's rolling out her campaign, her candidacy, that you will not hear on television. I can virtually guarantee. Here it is.
America's middle class is under attack. Billionaires and big corporations decided they wanted more of the pie, and they enlisted politicians to cut them a fatter slice. They crippled unions so no one could stop them.
We're going to turn the bull loose.
Dismantled the financial rules meant to keep us safe after the Great Depression, and cut their own taxes so they paid less than their secretaries and janitors. Corruption is poisoning our democracy. Politicians look the other way while big insurance companies deny patients life-saving coverage, while big banks rip off consumers, and while big oil companies destroy this planet. Our government's supposed to work for all of us, but instead it has become a tool for the wealthy and well-connected.
And there you go. So this is Elizabeth Warren just laying it out. What do you think? I'm very excited by the fact that she has thrown her hat into the ring. I see the beginning, and I'm really, really excited that it was a progressive who first started out this process. I think this is a good sign for the future of democracy in the United States. So we'll see where this goes. Harry Reid has some thoughts on Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, meanwhile, yesterday throwing tear gas and chemical weapons at women and children south of the border. surprise, surprise, Stephen Miller's brutal racist policies roll on, because that does go well with about 15% of the white base out there, maybe 25.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, it's just amazing what this guy is getting away with. Back with your calls, your thoughts as well. More of the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Paula in Houston, Texas. Hey, Paula, thanks for watching the program. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just wondering, to me, it seems, being in Texas, okay, I'm around a lot of immigrants from lots of different places. It seems to me like nobody's talking about the elephant in the room, which is that immigrants, whether legal or illegal, are not going to come here and stay here if there aren't employers that give them jobs. I worked for a commercial landscaping company. We had, undocumented, well, they had documents, but I'm sure that they were, falsified. But we had, immigrants on our staff, and because we couldn't find many other people that wanted to mow lawns in August, and it was just understood that we just kind of looked the other way in terms of their documentation.
Right.
And nobody seems to be bringing up anything about that. There is a system for verifying Social Security numbers and green card, work permits. It's called E-Verify, but employers are not required to use it. Yeah. It's voluntary.
I agree, Paula, and this is, I first wrote about this in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, back in 2010, I think it was, and Bernie endorsed it, that we don't have an illegal immigrant problem in the United States. We have an illegal employer problem. And,
there you go.
And prior to 1986, we used to routinely put employers in jail or shut down their companies if they hired people who were not in the United States legally, as happens in every other country in the world. I lived and worked in both Germany and Australia, and in both cases I had to get work permits, and it was a multi-month process, and it was serious stuff. So yeah, I'm totally with you. There is a larger issue here, though, kind of in the forest and trees scenario. And that is that cheap labor has become crack cocaine in the United States. From the Dust Bowl era until, because the Dust Bowl hit in northern Mexico as well, from the Dust Bowl era until the mid-1960s or thereabouts, we had this program, the Bracero program. That was mostly in the 1950s during the Eisenhower administration. But there was a wink and a nod when it came to agricultural workers. People, and in fact, every year about 1 million people would come north during picking season, and then they'd go back south at the end of picking season. And, right. Because the border was completely open, and we didn't have a problem with, quote, illegal immigration. It's just that there was this low-wage sector called agriculture, and everybody was kind of like, yeah, we want our food to be cheap, so that's fine. Well, when Reagan stopped enforcing the law against hiring people who are not here legally in '86 after his amnesty program, when he stopped enforcing that law, that conventional wisdom spread to every other industry. So then, meat packing, for example, well, we're not going to pay, good union wages anymore. And people are saying, well, we just can't find people who are willing to work in meat packing plants. And the missing part of that sentence is for these crappy wages. And the construction has, the same thing has happened in sector after sector, the back ends of restaurants all over the country. All of these jobs, people, the excuse is, well, we can't find Americans who are willing to work at these jobs, and they never say because we pay, crappy wages. It's like this crack cocaine. America's employers are addicted to cheap labor, and we need to break that addiction. And we need to break that addiction by simply outlawing. Paula, thank you for the call. Spot on. You really identified, one of my favorite issues also. Stick around. We'll be right back at 6 minutes past the hour. 21 minutes past the hour. 6 seconds. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You cruel and inhumane. This is what Amnesty International is calling what Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and Mike Pence just did at the southern border, throwing chemical weapons at children and you know, men and women as well, who were simply trying to achieve asylum status. These are not immigrants. These are, and it makes me crazy that the media keeps referring to them as immigrants. These are not people who are looking for a job. These are people who are fleeing not just poverty, they're fleeing death threats. Nicaragua now is like locked down. It's turned into a police state. In Honduras and El Salvador, you've got death squads. And this is all the result of Reagan's policies back in the 80s that completely disrupted these three countries. And then the refusal of subsequent Republican administrations to have anything to do with you know, encouraging democracy in these countries. We've got just this flaming disaster that's going on. And yesterday, you know, Trump and Pence's CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, throwing chemical weapons at these people, at the so-called violent, it's a violent mob, says Trump. Harry Reid says, Donald Trump is an interesting person. He's not immoral, he is amoral. Amoral is when you shoot someone in the head and it doesn't make a difference. You have no conscience. Reid goes on to say that he's the worst president we've ever had. There's not even a close second. He lies, he cheats, you can't reason with him. And, you know, Harry Reid would know about this kind of stuff. It's, you know, he has been observing politicians his entire life. Harry, by the way, Senator Reid is dying right now from pancreatic cancer. So we all send him our very best wishes. The Green New Deal is starting to take form and take shape. And Elizabeth Warren has now said that she's signed on with it. She's the first person who is fairly overtly running for president of the United States, and she's hitting 4 towns in Iowa, I believe, this week or this weekend. A sign that it can be done. The country in Europe that is most dependent on oil revenues is Norway. Norway pumps oil out of the North Shore. It's the basis of their economy. It's the basis of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's a big deal, and the Norwegians get this. And so they are trying to take their country off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. And so what they did was they said, as a starting point, hey, you know, the 2 areas that, well, I guess probably in Norway, 3 areas that are the highest for fossil fuel usage are transportation, heating, and electricity. And so transportation's a big piece of this. This is about 1/3 of total fossil fuel usage in most countries. It certainly is here in the United States. So what they said was, we're going to eliminate all taxes on cars sold in Norway that are 100% electric. Real simple. Plus, the government offers free parking in some places, you know, government office buildings, things like that. Free parking and even charging stations for all electric vehicles. In 2013, only 5% of cars sold in Norway were all electric. In 2017, it went up to 20%. And last year, 2018, just closed out, 31.2% of all cars sold in Norway, all electric cars. This is really rolling along rapidly. And we could do this here. Instead of subsidizing to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year the fossil fuel industry, all we have to do is start saying, you know, hey, we're going to offer subsidies, or at least we're going to reduce taxes on electric vehicles. Straightforward stuff. Anyhow, it's 27 minutes past the hour. We're going to pick up your calls after the bottom of the hour here. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news, where we speak the truths the multinational corporations and apparently the rest of the corporate media would really rather you didn't know all about.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls in just a moment. Our book today is From Slave Ship to Supermax, Mass Incarceration, Prisoner Abuse, and the New Neo-Slave Model by Patrick Elliott Alexander. This is Chapter 1. Talking in George Jackson's Shadow is the title, If Beale Street Could Talk. Prison preoccupied the literary imagination of James Baldwin. Yet his biographer David Leeming is one of the few to notice that prisons and prisoners were a significant part of Baldwin's own personal experience. Even the most cursory glance at Baldwin's published works and interviews bear out Leeming's important observation. In his essay Equal in Paris, 1955, Baldwin reveals that during his time in France, he was, quote, arrested as a receiver of stolen goods and spent 8 days in prison. While confined, Baldwin witnessed with great shock another incarcerated man's bleeding and wounding go unattended intentionally by prison staff. In his longer essay, No Name on the Street, 1972, Baldwin reflects on frequent prison visits that he made to his friend Tony Maynard, a black man who suffered violent treatment from guards after he was falsely accused with the murder of a white U.S. Marine. Baldwin's advocacy for black political prisoners in particular deeply informed his writings and public addresses throughout the 1970s and included actions such as aiding in the release of imprisoned Black Panther Party co-founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. In 1970, Baldwin was so outraged by the appearance of Angela Davis, the black revolutionary and advocate for political prisoners in handcuffs and mock mugshot posture on the cover of Newsweek magazine, that he published an open letter to the New York Review of Books in which he deemed her jailing a continuation of slavery and a foreshadowing of a radicalized epidemic of mass incarceration at one and at the same time. Quote, only a handful of the millions of people in this vast place are unaware that the fate intended for you, Sister Angela, and for the numberless prisoners in our concentration camps, for that is what they are, is a fate which is about to engulf them too, end quote. When Baldwin spoke out about racism in the criminal justice system in the Dick Cavett Show in 1973, he won widespread admiration among imprisoned black communities, receiving, quote, so many letters from them that he determined to arrange a Christmas version of his musical drama, The Hallelujah Chorus, that would tour American prisons. Finally, in 1982, Baldwin published a letter in which he insisted that artists and prisoners have more in common with one another than have servants of the state. Baldwin was a stranger neither to witnessing nor to writing about prisons and prisoner abuse. Yet Baldwin's oeuvre had not been examined extensively in the context of his engagements with the literature and life experiences of imprisoned men and women. This chapter focuses on Baldwin's understanding of prisoner abuse and police intimidation as interrelated, radicalized social control functions of the contemporary U.S. carceral state, and pays careful attention to how his historicizing of radicalized state violence in fiction is shaped by his admiring engagement with the writings of imprisoned intellectuals. Baldwin, I contend, alludes to the human chattel conditioning, disciplinary violence, and economic exploitation that typified the institution of slavery in his Black Liberation Movement era short stories and novels to situate his black working class characters' subjection to racial profiling, police brutality, wrongful incarceration, indefinite solitary confinement, prisoner abuse, and premature death in racialized historical context. Focusing mostly on Baldwin's novel If Beale Street Could Talk, 1974, this chapter explores how Baldwin, inspired by the narrative techniques of the imprisoned intellectual George Jackson, links a repressive logic of racial terror from the era of antebellum slavery with the state's practice of white supremacist social control into the contemporary criminal justice system. I argue that by incorporating Baldwin's conception of neo-slavery into the elusive framework for Beale Street, Baldwin elucidates the predictability, rather than the aberrant nature, of black men's hypercriminalization, incarceration, and brutalization by the state. Beale Street thus exemplifies well what I theorized in the introduction as a neo-abolitionist novel. With this work, Baldwin becomes the first canonical African-American writer to construct a conceptual model of the prison-industrial complex in fiction that privileges the narrative viewpoint of its captives while also making apparent slavery's vestiges in the contemporary U.S. criminal justice system. My point of departure for this chapter is Baldwin's career-length consideration of racial terror as a state-sanctioned social control function of both pre- and post-slavery American life, and the relationship of this instrumentalist terror to blacks' recurring encounters with state violence in the late 20th and 21st centuries. This contextualization establishes a broader framework within which my reading of criminalization and punishment in Beale Street might be understood. Baldwin's witnessing of the physical, psychological, and spiritual harm that the criminalized black body endures at the hands of the state shows up prominently in his nonfiction works as well. In his book-length essay, No Name in the Street, for instance, Baldwin's assessment of wounds that prison guards inflict on his former driver and bodyguard, Tony Maynard, a wrongfully incarcerated black man, is characteristically disturbing and damning. The book, From Slave Ship to Supermax.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Gran in New York City. Hey, Gran, what's up?
Glenn.
Glenn,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
This making the post office pay way into the future. Isn't that they have to put that money somewhere? Aren't they using that to run the government in lieu of higher taxes?
Yeah, the $5 billion a year that the post office has to set aside for retiree health benefits 75 years from now, people who are not even born yet. That money is being invested in treasuries, so it is stored in the national debt.
Yeah, so it's used to run the government. That's
Right.
just a sneaky way of the Republicans using the post office instead of paying higher taxes.
Arguably, yeah. I think the main goal, if you go back to 2005 and just start looking through the newspaper headlines, and I was doing this show at the time, which is why I remember this. We started this show in 2003, and in 2005, the post office was riding high. They had a solid, positive budget. They were making money. They had a surplus, in fact. And they announced that they were, I don't recall if they were actually going to pull the trigger and do it, or if they were just, in the process of doing some sort of a really deep dive into the viability, the feasibility of it. But they announced that being the owners of the largest vehicle fleet in the United States, that's the post office, all those little postal trucks that go around and deliver the mail every day. Being the owners of the largest vehicle fleet in the United States, the post office was going to make all of their vehicles electric, or the vast majority of them. I guess in some rural areas, electric wasn't yet practical, but they were going to shift over to electric vehicles, and this would have jump-started the entire electric vehicle industry. So the fossil fuel billionaires and their buddies got together with members of Congress and said, got to put a stop to this right now. And the way they did it was bleeding the money out of the post office. So how do you bleed money out of the post office? What they came up with is, the only way we can think of to bleed the money is to force the post office to take $5 billion a year, a massive amount of money from their budget, take $5 billion a year, and buy treasuries with it. Just stick it aside for 75 years. Don't use it for anything. And that's exactly what the Republicans did. And it's still, every year they have to set aside $5 billion to pay for the retirement benefits of people 75 years from now. It is nuts. This was pure and simple an effort to, the other pure and simple an effort to destroy the electric vehicle piece, but they did have an ally in that. And that ally was the private delivery services, UPS, FedEx, who were gung-ho for this too because they view the post office as competition. And this is just so wrong. Howard in Indiana. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind today?
Talking about health care, I heard you mention it earlier, and I know it's been talked about before on your program. The real crux of the thing is our government, we're trying to figure out ways to manage and pay for health care or health care for all, but I very rarely hear anyone step up and say, well, instead of health care, let's pay for like a wellness care. What can we do for people to enhance their health so they won't be going to the doctor or the hospital so much?
Yeah, I would say number one, Howard, is a national health care program. Louise and I went to a local chain restaurant, shall we say, over the holiday weekend for breakfast one morning, and it was astonishing. The food on the first of all, the portions were huge. Secondly, the food was kind of crappy. And third, as you checked out, there was just literally a wall of candy. And it all had high fructose corn syrup, which we know causes obesity and fatty liver disease. And it occurred in our conversation as we were walking home. It was like, well, what do we do about this? How do you wake people up? And the consensus that we arrived at, and I think that this is a good one, is if we had a national healthcare system, so that the obesity epidemic in the United States, which is, I think, to a large extent being caused by the food that is being shoveled at us. We didn't have this situation 40 years ago. It's not like our genetics changed in 40 years. This is fuel. This is the result. If we had a national healthcare system where we were all paying for the cost of obesity-associated diseases, and this is just one example, by the way. I think you could say the same thing about cancer and all the carcinogens in our food, celiac and the problems associated with Roundup. But in the case of obesity, if we were all paying for that diabetes, if we were all paying for that heart disease, if we were all paying for that fatty liver disease, and by the way, cirrhosis is one of the most rapidly growing diseases in the United States right now, cirrhosis of the liver, non-alcoholic. It's caused by obesity. That if we were all paying for that we would have different government policies. We would be saying to restaurants, like that Cracker Barrel where we went for breakfast, you really should label this stuff as poison, or as bad for you. We would change our policies. So, Howard, in answer to your question, I think that the simple, straightforward answer is Medicare for all. Sunday in Newcastle, Wyoming. Hey, Sunday, what's up? Sunday?
Mainstream news media not reporting the truth and not supporting our candidates. Everyone readily recognizes that the corporations control the media. Does anyone delve into who the individual people within those corporations that make the decisions are?
If you want to find that out, go to a website called theyrule.net. THEYRULE, theyrule.net. And it gives you the ability to look at the... I'm sorry?
I just watched the documentary on Who Rules America.
Oh, really?
And, yeah. And there are other sources as well. If you can delve into who actually makes those decisions, you'll find that there is a heavy Jewish control there.
Oh, Sunday, you don't want to go down that road at all. John in Cumberland, Maryland. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, how are you, Tom? Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, too.
Listen, I'm going to address your question, will Elizabeth Warren be our next president? And I've got to say no, and it breaks my heart. When her name comes up on MSNBC, everybody snickers. Elizabeth Warren, appeals to people like me. Like I got my undergraduate degree at Tufts University.
John, they snickered about Bernie, too.
Yeah,
In fact, they ignored him for a whole year.
But, I'm Boston Irish, by origin, even though I'm living in Western Maryland now after a career with NASA. But, my cousins hate her. And, it's just horrible. First of all, they're going to try to tar her with the same brush as Hillary Clinton, who, is a neocon and a neoliberal. Elizabeth Warren is not. But they're going to try to make that connection, which is just criminal. I'd like to give you a quote, if I may. I'm gonna keep this short. I'm going to give you a quote from John Steinbeck. And I think this is the biggest problem that people like Elizabeth Warren, who would be a great president, have, and that is the reason socialism cannot take root in the U.S. is that too much of the working class regard themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Yep. Yeah, and it's a great quote. I agree broadly, John, but that said, I'm not so confident that the corporate media really has the control that they think they have. And, like I said, they dissed Bernie, they laughed at Bernie, they laughed at Donald Trump. I don't think that this is a predetermined thing, but, we'll see. I hope you're wrong, John. Lyle in Youngstown, Arizona. Hey, Lyle, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Nice to talk to you again. I wanted to ask you a question about taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I went to college. My degree is in accounting and taxation, and I started working with ASB a number of years back, getting small business loans for startup businesses. But I noticed since the Reagan era that all of a sudden all the politicians started talking about tax cuts. Like tax is a four-letter word.
Right.
And how since that time, that's all they preach is tax cuts, tax cuts. And earlier you were talking about government-funded agencies that can't afford their retirement funds. That is all supposed to be funded by taxation. And, going back to the Roosevelt era, in those days, people with a high income had to pay 90% of their upper earnings toward taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about maybe 15%.
Yeah.
How do you reverse that?
You point out what a scam it is. I have an article that I wrote over the weekend that was just published a few hours ago on alternet.org titled hang on just a second, let me get the title here. They put a new title on it. The GOP's most successful scam is about to reboot itself. And it's about how any minute now you're going to see all the TV pundits and everybody else, but in particular the serious thinkers, the Republicans, talking about we've got a debt crisis in the United States. And, it's a BS debt crisis, but this is what you're going to see, Lyle. So, I think that's the answer. I think that, the way to solve this problem or to deal with it, frankly, for lack of a better phrase, is to simply educate people. Lyle, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Everything just crashed. I know. Welcome back. We just had a catastrophic crash, closed the program of our call screening system. Fortunately, our engineer is here, and is Magic Dave going to make things work? So, how Elizabeth Warren could win the 2020 Democratic primary is the question. Elizabeth Warren announces Iowa trip as she starts running for president in 2020. These are the big stories. Oh, hang on just a second. And welcome back. Actually, I've got my call screen back. I've got some callers here. I don't see your name or where you're calling from, but I just put you on the air. You would have heard a whoosh sound. So you want to tell us who you are and where you're calling from?
This is Tony in Michigan.
Hey, Tony. So what's on your mind today?
Tom, this is just meant purely as I like you a lot. I appreciate you. But I just am noticing a change in your demeanor. You seem to be more wound up, and you seem to be less patient with your callers than you usually are. That's all.
Oh, okay, you mean today or generally speaking? Okay,
No,
Dave.
today.
Maybe I had an extra cup of coffee this morning, but thanks a lot for the call. And that's interesting. Let's see here. Hey, you're on the air. I don't have your name or city. You want to tell us who you are and where you're calling from? Hello.
Meyer,
Hi.
Amarillo.
Okay. What's up?
I just saw a couple of days ago something called Crumbling America, #1 on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's a full documentary, and it's from 2014,
Right.
and it truly just amazed me. We do have bad infrastructure.
Yeah, we do.
I'd like to see something about that on your show. Talk about it.
Sure, I do talk about that with some regularity. I mean, you can thank Ronald Reagan for most of this. That was during the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, in response to his massive tax cut on billionaires and very wealthy people and corporations. We went from corporations paying over a third of the federal budget to now I think it's around 6 or 7%. You can thank Reagan for that. That was the beginning of the crumbling of America.
I recommend that everybody see that video. It is absolutely just devastating to watch.
Yeah.
And 1 or 2 days ago, we had a coal train, going across tracks on a dam, and the dam burst.
Oh
and all
my.
the coal dumped in the river.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yeah, we have this problem all over the United States, and something needs to be done about that, too.
Amen. And you will recall Donald Trump campaigned on he was going to put all this money into infrastructure. In fact, he was talking about how our airports are third rate and our railroads are falling apart. And I mean, he's traveled around the world. He knows that American infrastructure sucks. And so a lot of people voted for him thinking, wow, this guy's going to make America great again. He's going to rebuild our country. He's going to put our infrastructure back together. And then he became president, and it was like, who cares about that? We've got to build a wall on the southern border because there's brown people coming to America. And it turns out there aren't actually. In the last 8-10 years, there's been a net negative migration to the United States. People are leaving, not coming in. Anyhow, thanks for the call. Spot on. Very, very well said. Ellen Ratner's up next with Talk Media News. Stick around. We'll be right back. Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thanks for supporting. Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. Hey, Ellen.
Well, thank you so much. I've got to tell you that it's interesting. The president is going to be having a meeting with the incoming Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the minority leader now of the House, and the majority leader of the Senate, and the minority leader of the Senate, who is Chuck Schumer. And he's going to be discussing what they should do about the closing of the government. Now, it's very interesting. They have shut down all of the Smithsonian museums, the zoo, the FCC is going to be shut down. I mean, really,
it's starting to get real.
Matter to Americans.
Yeah, it's starting to get very real.
And so we'll see what he says. Now, he says he's negotiating Yeah, well, all right, let's see what he does, right? Because he changes his mind faster than you and I can say Jack Rabbit.
Yep. Amen.
Okay, so he also was shocked by Governor Romney, who's now going to be Senator Romney's op-ed in the Washington Post. He said that he had supported Mitt Romney, and then Mitt Romney called and thanked him profusely, but now he is going after him. And the question that you and I can ask is Mitt Romney trying to make another run for president?
Oh, obviously he is. He's going to try and primary Trump in this next year. And frankly, I think that there's a very good chance that he'll succeed, and because people don't want Pence either. And he would be a formidable foe against a Democrat in 2020, and I think the Republicans all know this, particularly as long as the news media refuses to discuss issues. If the news media was, because in Romney's op-ed in the Washington Post today, he came right out and he said, we like what Trump is doing. We like his tax cut.
We just don't like Trump.
Right. We just don't like him as a person, but we love all these policies. These are great. But the American people don't love those policies. The American, Romney specifically said, we love the deregulation. Well, I'm telling you, people who live downriver from coal plants, coal-fired power plants, downwind from they're not loving the fact that they got more pollution in their face now. I mean, it's crazy that the Republican agenda will not be called out. But I think that's entirely possible.
That's right, and the news media is not, they're talking about this op-ed, but they're not saying that he said, as you said, that he is really somebody who is supporting the Republican agenda. 100%.
In fact, Romney comes right out and says it in the op-ed, and nobody is paying attention to that, which just blows my mind.
Nobody is paying attention. It makes me wild.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of people paying attention, Judicial Watch, not exactly a democratic institution, has actually sent a FOIA request. They said that they want to see what Americans are now spending from their taxes for a special counsel's person to watch over them and make sure that he's not hurt in anything kind of way, and how much they're spending to do that. I mean, give me a break.
They want to know what kind of security Robert Mueller has?
That's right, and how much it's costing the American taxpayer. So why don't they ask some other questions about how much it's costing the American taxpayer?
Like how much is it costing the American taxpayers for Trump's kids to go on international trips to hustle his business interests?
Exactly. And none of that is being FOIA'd, but the Judicial Watch is FOIAing these.
Yeah, they're partisan hacks. Larry Klayman. Is Larry still running that?
Is who?
Larry Klayman still running Judicial Watch?
I think he is actually, yes.
The one good thing that they did was when they subpoenaed Cheney's energy committee rule, documents, and they found that in March, April, May, and June of 2001, before 9/11, Cheney was sitting around figuring out, with his buddies, figuring out which oil fields in Iraq they were going to sell to which companies once they took down Iraq. It was just mind-boggling.
Right. Well, I'm dying to see Vice, the new
it's great.
I
went out to New York a couple of weeks ago and saw the pre-screening with Adam McKay, and it's a brilliant movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay, so I got to go see it.
You're going to love it. And it's some of the best acting I've seen in years.
Wow. So the president also tweeted today his upset with McChrystal, but in fact, McChrystal, who was who worked under President Obama, the things that he said about him were not true. And so, there again is Trump tweeting out, using his tweets to do whatever he can.
Yep. If Trump speaks, it's probably a lie. I think you were standing next to me at that talkers convention maybe 13, 14, 15 years ago,
right.
And McChrystal was standing there, and one of us asked him, how do we get out of Afghanistan? And he said, we can't kill our way out of this war. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I do recall that. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And here we are in Afghanistan now, and of course, Trump simply wants to pull out the troops. Well, that's not going to save anybody.
Yeah, amen.
Nor in Syria. And frankly, I've been to Syria, and I've seen how bad things can get.
Yeah.
Okay. The only piece of good news I have for you is the New Horizons spacecraft actually is now beyond Pluto and is sending back images. So that is really very good news. We finally made something that actually works.
There you go. And it was NASA. It was a government agency that did it.
Right.
Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Hey, thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. And thank you for being with us today. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same bat place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. You don't just watch it on TV. You know, if you want it to work, if you want to have a functioning republic that is actually responsive to we the people, you've got to participate. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.